The year is 1998, and for the first time in over 100 years, Ireland will finally be at peace. But how have we gotten here? What has caused the nation of Ireland so much pain for all of these years? Well, first we have to take a look into Ireland's history, more specifically, the start of what would soon be known as the Troubles.
Okay, guys, let's have a go. I'll try and answer some of your questions best I can.
All right.
Before we uncover more about the Troubles, let's discuss a key figure in shifting the tides of the major event known as the Troubles. Bertie Ahern is an Irish politician who played a major role in attaining peace for Northern Ireland. Being born in 1951 in Dublin, Ireland, and with his father being a member of the old IRA, the Irish Republican Army that fought against British Unionists for an independent Ireland, he had early involvement in the Troubles from a young age. He served in smaller political positions until eventually being elected Taoiseach, the Irish equivalent to a prime minister, in 1997. He was known for his negotiating skills and determination, which he used to help resolve many of the problems in Northern Ireland. We were fortunate enough to have the opportunity to interview Ahern, giving us insight into his experience and actions during the time period.
So, what exactly was the Troubles? Well, for starters, it was an almost 30-year-long conflict between the Irish Republicans and British Unionists in Northern Ireland. Between the 1960s to 1998, the country became divided as the two sides to the conflict have been entwined for centuries. Both Britain and Ireland sustained major loss and damage from the fighting, although a ceasefire was established that managed to diffuse most of the violence in Northern Ireland. There are still many issues and problems left from the Troubles that are still being discussed today. But how did the country descend into violence, and why?
While the day known as Bloody Sunday, a peaceful protest that turned into homicide, may be a direct cause to the period of conflict known as the Troubles, oppression in Ireland and hatred between the sides can be traced back centuries before. British attempts to colonize Ireland can be traced back to the 1100s, and the nation fell under British rule during the 1600s. Britain, having a mostly Protestant population, attempted to reform the Catholic country, but failed to do so. The Irish had been faced with terrible famine and poverty, but they were determined to drive Britain out of their homeland, leading to the formation of the IRA, or Irish Republican Army. The IRA and the people of Ireland fought against British rule in a giant rebellion, leading to the pivotal moment in history known as the Easter Rising of 1916 and other uprisings like it. This rebellion eventually led to a treaty being signed in 1921, making most of Ireland an independent state, but Northern Ireland was still under British rule. The Catholics, or Republicans, fought for freedom from Britain, while Unionists, or Protestants, were loyal to Britain and wanted to colonize the island. Generations of both nationalities often had disputes and disagreements due to religion or beliefs, but British oppression of Catholic or Republicans in Northern Ireland became more prominent going into the mid-20th century, where tensions quickly rose among society. The events of Bloody Sunday in 1972 marked a dark chapter for Irish and British history and is often referred to as the day the Troubles started. On the Sunday of January 30th, 1972, Republic Catholics filled the streets of Londonderry in protest for civil rights. Paratroopers opened fire upon the unsuspecting crowd, killing 13 civilians instantly and injuring another 14. Before Bloody Sunday, most of the country was against bringing back the IRA and using violence, but this event ignited a new flame under the IRA, leading to a 30-year period of violence and guerrilla warfare in Northern Ireland.
So, what made the Troubles such a gruesome time for Ireland? During the Troubles, over 3,700 lives were lost, with around 50,000 injured. This included civilians, members of the security forces, paramilitaries, and others caught in the crossfire of both the IRA and Loyalist forces. Civilian lives bore the brunt of the killing. Thousands of innocent men, women, and children were killed in bombings, shootings, and other attacks. The ruthless nature of these attacks led to decades of fear and trauma on both sides of the violence. Many communities were displaced, which led to the corruption of society in Northern Ireland. Families were forced to leave their homes as the result of threats and intimidation, while many community run businesses were heavily damaged from bombings and attacks. Not to mention the countless survivors of these attacks forced to grapple with the loss of loved ones, trauma, and mental health issues. Furthermore, there were many prisoners of war on both sides of the fight, and nationalities further separated bonds in Northern Irish society. Now, Bertie Ahern will discuss some other consequences Ireland had to face due to the Troubles.
I suppose one of the important things, guys, is that as part of the agreement, not alone were all the things I said, but there also had to be changes in the Constitution and changes in British law. We changed what was known as Articles 2 and 3 in the Irish Constitution, which was effectively us claiming jurisdiction over Northern Ireland. And in the British one, the Government of Ireland Act, which set up Northern Ireland 1920, that was dropped.
So, in turn, not only lives were lost, but both Ireland and Britain were forced to change laws deciding the ownership and control of Northern Ireland. So, what boundaries were Ahern and other politicians ready to cross in order to find a political solution and look for peace for Northern Ireland?
So we were trying to see, how we could try and bring the sides together to stop the violence. And then maybe if that could be done, could we find a political solution? Now, it seemed a tall order at that time, but we kind of set out a plan that, let's see how we could deal with this. So we had a step-by-step approach.
The only way that a ceasefire could be discussed would be to have cooperation on both sides of the fight, which was a challenging feat at the time. Many private organizations and individuals worked tirelessly to formulate a peaceful solution to the conflict, including politicians, religious figures, community leaders, and even international supporters, all recognizing the futility of further violence and corruption of Ireland. They utilized a plan where they would approach problems one at a time and slowly build up to their main objective, which was to end the violence in Northern Ireland and to come up with a political solution to further implement peace into a society that has known war for close to 3 decades. The Troubles pulled in masses of attention from all over the world, particularly in the 80s and 90s, at the pinnacle of the violence. Even before the Troubles started, many Republicans were inspired by the peaceful protests of African Americans for civil rights in America, meaning many voiced their opinions and ideals. This led to diplomatic pressure on both sides in order to engage in discussion and seek an end to the brutality. But what exactly was his role in the peace process, and why was he such an important figure in Irish history?
I suppose you have to go back a few years when I was leader of the opposition from 1994. I got very friendly with Tony Blair, who was the leader of the opposition in the UK. So both of us started having meetings, privately first, then publicly, in opposition. And what we were looking at is, if both of us were elected prime minister, for him, Taoiseach for me, what could we do in Northern Ireland that was different? I mean, what plan or proposal or strategy could we have that might help to stop the violence? And our main concern was to see if there was some way of stopping the violence.
Ahern was deeply committed to finding the answer to united Ireland and engaged in intensive dialogue with leaders from all over the political spectrum, including British Prime Minister Tony Blair and groups such as the IRA and Sinn Féin. Tony Blair was another major factor in the peace process for Northern Ireland. Tony Blair was a politician on the opposing side, or the Loyalist side, who became the UK Prime Minister a month before Bertie was elected Taoiseach in 1997. Ahern and Blair became close friends in around 1994 and held private meetings that eventually gave the two political figures momentum to create change. Since both the Unionist and Republican sides of the conflict were reluctant to work together and tension was high between the two political parties, it was a challenge to get cooperation amongst them, as they had very different views. But Ahern had an eagerness to listen to all perspectives and generate trust among the parties, which played a crucial role in providing Ireland with a path towards peace.
But what would be able to satisfy both parties and help settle down the violence in Northern Ireland? More specifically, what was the solution to the troubles that Bertie and many others had been working on for so long?
So as soon as we were elected, we got working on that plan, and really we reckoned that, like all these things, if you don't move fast, nothing happens. So between summer 97 and Easter 98 is when we were at it every day, every weekend, trying to push the parties in, trying to get movement in, trying to work with everybody. We had good people, good officials on both our sides. So we, like all these things, you need a bit of luck. You have to try and you have to get guys to listen to you. We had a lot of help from President Clinton, a lot of help from George Mitchell, who was this had been the leader of the majority group in the Senate. So American involvement was really helpful to us. So we kind of motivated everybody to try, and here's one big push. And we all worked really hard that 97, 98 period. But it wasn't just Tony Blair and me. It was a lot of people working together, a lot of people committed to trying to bring an end to the violence and see how we could move forward.
On April 10th, 1998, the Good Friday Agreement, or Belfast Agreement, was ratified, earning 70% of votes in Northern Ireland and a massive 80% from the rest of the country, leading to the end of decades of grueling violence and hatred. But what was the agreement, and how did it establish peace? Early efforts to find a solution came from Tony Blair and Bertie Ahern, with a lot of help from foreign interventions, such as United States diplomat George Mitchell and President Clinton. They initiated talks between the Unionists and Nationalists to come to a ceasefire. While efforts started years prior to the signing of the agreement, they began slowly configuring a way to stop violence in the streets of Northern Ireland. The agreement set up a new government in Northern Ireland that represented both Unionists and Nationalists, and stated prisoners from the war would be released, arms were to be disposed of, and that Britain would withdraw most military activity from Northern Ireland. Not only this, it supported both nationalities, granting them more rights and protection of their freedoms.
I think the big thing was, probably repeating myself, was the first thing was to see if we could get people to agree just to stop the violence and give us a chance to negotiate an agreement, because you couldn't allow people to be at the negotiating table and at the same time they're out killing each other at night time. So George Mitchell had set up 4 or 5 principles. They became afterwards quite famous, and they're used in other conflicts in other parts of the world, the Mitchell principles. And basically what it says is you can't shoot yourself to the negotiating table. You have to stop the violence. You could have been involved in violence for years, but you have to stop the violence and go into negotiations and commit yourself that you'll accept whatever comes out of those negotiations, and you're just not going to continue on the violence. Now, it's easier said than done, but at least it was a good benchmark to work on.
Even with outside help and a good strategy to develop an agreement, there were still many issues and worries. For example, the agreement would only work if the majority of both Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland voted in favor of the agreement through referendums. While one might think it would be simple to gain the support of the nation by offering peace to a war-stricken society, the community was divided due to large amounts of distrust and fear in Northern Ireland. I mean, could you blame them? Could one ceasefire put out the flames of 3 decades of violence and hatred in Northern Ireland? Many were asking the same questions, so Republican political figures spoke out in reassurance that the agreement would protect the people of Northern Ireland from both nationalities and that peace would be attained. Ahern, Blair, and many others worked tirelessly for nearly 9 months, pulling in as much support from political parties and communities as possible. The US played a major role in the history of Ireland as well. The Good Friday Agreement was presented to the government of the United Kingdom, where the agreement would be decided by a referendum from the community. It was ratified by both Ireland and the UK. Celebrations were held all across the country, commemorating the lives lost and celebrating the newfound peace, dawning a new era for Ireland that will last for many years to come. What are your thoughts on the future of a united Ireland?
Part of the agreement of the Good Friday Agreement, which is, as I said, is the will of the people, is that from time to time there can be a vote of the whole island to decide whether people want to have a united Ireland or a new Ireland, as I rather call it, or Northern Ireland stays with Britain. Now, because we've had a fair bit of instability over the years, we haven't had a round to the first vote. Now, I believe in a united Ireland, a new Ireland. I mean, that would be my political aspiration. It's been my political aspiration. That was my father before me since the agreement of 1920. So so it's easy to say that's what you'd want, but it's to try and make that work. And ultimately, there will be a vote of the people. But before that vote takes place, the detail has to be worked out. How it would work, how it would operate, how it would function, how it would be paid for. And there's now a lot of academic studies going on. A lot of universities are doing work on how it would work. There's more and more debate about it, but there's still a long way to go, guys. So I think you guys will be a few years older before we finally have the vote. But there will be a vote. Whether it's passed or not is a thing for another day.
Yeah.
And increasingly, I should say, on the British side, the British are beginning to talk up the union and protecting the union, which it means to keep Northern Ireland with England, Scotland, and Wales. They didn't bother doing anything for about the last 10 years, but they're beginning to talk that up again. So the lines will be drawn. My side will be arguing for a new Ireland, an Ireland where we can probably, hopefully, bring in unionists and loyalists into it. And the British will be fighting for the union to keep it as it is. So hopefully that debate will continue on. I'd say it'll continue on for a good few years, guys. And we'll see what happens. But there will ultimately be a vote. And I'd say it'll be a fairly hot referendum campaign whenever it happens.
Yeah.
But there needs to be a lot of work done before that happens.
While temporary peace was established, there was still much to be done for Bertie and other politicians. For example, prisoners of war were freed and branches of the IRA broke off into subgroups, which had to be organized and dealt with. Walls separating Catholic and Protestant neighborhoods can still be seen, and there's still a lot of disagreement and worry in both parties, which is being discussed today. The formation of the Good Friday Agreement was an incredible feat and serves as an example of how countries can interact and form solutions. Many countries dealing with similar crises have met with Irish politicians to understand their approach. Although the agreement was far from perfect in many eyes, and there is still much to be done to ensure long-lasting peace, it laid the foundation for a united country and inspired hope that peace could be attained in Northern Ireland.